Hello and welcome to the next YouTube video on my channel. If you want to get better at chess, then this video is just right for you. In this video I'm going to talk about the famous King's Gambit. I will show you how it begins and explain you the many different continuation variations of it. So let's get started. The King's Gambit begins pretty common with pawns e4, e5, and then you, playing the white chess pieces, play pawn f4, attacking black's pawn on e5. The idea of the King's Gambit is to occupy the center with the two center pawns e4 and d4, after the black pawn on e5 has taken out your pawn on f4. The overweight in the center can be used for easier and freer chess piece development, but also for a king attack later in the game. Another idea is to recapture the weak f4 pawn of black, or distract the pawn with moves like pawn g2 on g3 to use the f line later for attacks, which will be open then. And now I'm going to tell you the main continuation variation after pawn f2 on f4, e4. And that's the King's Gambit accepted. So the black pawn takes out the white pawn on f4, how the white army has also planned it. The most common way how to answer now is to play knight f3. This move is pretty good because it prevents the black army of playing queen h4. Because if you would, for example, not play knight f3, but rather, let's say, the d-pawn on d3, or also very aggressive on d4, then after the black army checks now with queen h4 on your king, you cannot defend this check with pawn g3, because then the black pawn on f4 will take out this pawn, and now the white queen also attacks your pawn on e4, and you also cannot take out black's pawn on g3, because then the black queen could just take out your rook on h1, which would be very bad for you. Here, the best way how to answer is to escape with the king from e1 on e2 from the check, but this move leaves you without a casting in this game anymore. So after you've played knight f3, you have very good options how to continue now. For example, you can attack the center very good with, for example, the d-pawn, pawn d3 from d2, or pawn d4 from d2. With this moves, you don't just only attack the center of the chessboard, but you also attack black's pawn on f4 with the queen's bishop now. The main option how to answer on f3 with the black army is to play pawn g5, defending their pawn on f4, which will be attacked after moves like d3 or d4 with the pawn. So now, the game develops a lot on the king's side of the chessboard, so on this side. But you don't stop attacking the black army. Here you can play pawn h4, forcing the black pawn now on g5 to continue going on g4, because pawn h6 to defend this pawn would lose to the rook, because takes, and now white rook takes black rook, and pawn f6 would lose to knight takes pawn on g5 after. So after pawn g4, your knight on f3 is attacked now by this pawn, and now you can either escape with the knight on g5, that's the Allgaier Gambit, or you can escape on from here on e5, attacking black's pawn on g4, that's the Kizaritsky Gambit. For very long time in the past, this gambit was considered the main line of the King's Gambit and the King's Knight Gambit. And now I come to my second continuation variations after the first two key moves of the King's Gambit and accepted, and that's the King's Bishop Gambit. Here, so in the King's Bishop Gambit, you play now, after the black army has accepted the gambit of taking out your pawn on f4 with their pawn on e5, you play now bishop c4. So you develop your king's bishop. Here, the Black army, of course, again can play queen h4, leaving the white army without a castling in this game, because the white king has escaped on e2. Other options for black are to just develop some chess pieces. For example, they can play knight f6, also attacking your pawn on e4. But a very modern variation of the king's bishop gambit is to play pawn d5 with the black army. This move is very aggressive because it attacks your pawn on e4 and your bishop on c4 at the same time. You can actually also play this move, so pawn d4, in the king's knight gambit. Here's now logic that you have the option to either take out black's pawn on d5 with your own pawn on e4, or with your bishop on d5, on c4, sorry. So if you take out the black pawn on d5 with your pawn on e4, then a very good move for black here is again to play just queen h4, and after you've escaped with the king on f1, the black army can play the very good move, and that's with the king's bishop on d6, defending their pawn on f4. But if you take out black's pawn on d5, attacking both of your chess pieces at the same time, with the bishop on c4, then this is good, because now your bishop here isn't blocked by your own pawn. Here, of course, the black army can again play queen h4, leaving you without a castling in this game. But in most of the cases, the black army will continue now with playing bishop f6, attacking both of your chess pieces, so your pawn on e4 and your knight on your bishop on d5 at the same time again. Here you have to be careful, because if you move away with the bishop, let's say for example on c4 again, then the black knight on f6 can take out your pawn on e4. So here it's pretty smart just to defend both of the chess pieces again at the same time too. And you can do this very good with knight c3. Till now I've shown and explained to you two variations of the king's gambit that are accepted. So the king's knight gambit and the king's bishop gambit. And now I will show you some continuation variations of the king's gambit that are declined. That's basically every move except of pawn on e5 takes out white's pawn on f4. So here, very famous, very common for black, how the answer is to play the London defense, and that's pawn d6, defending the attacked pawn on e5. Here, you can now either, with the white army, go over into the Fisher's defense of the king's knight gambit. This would be knight f3, attacking black's pawn on e5 now with the second chess piece, and then the black pawn would accept the king's gambit and take out your pawn on f4. But you could also now answer, instead of taking out white's pawn on f4 and accepting the king's gambit again, you could also pin white's knight on f3, which attacks the black pawn on e5, with queen's bishop on g4. Because now the knight can't take out here the pawn, because then the black bishop on g4 would just take out white's queen, which would be very bad for the white army. So here, after you have attacked the black's bishop on g4 and the knight and the bishop have been traded like this, and the queen comes out on f3, the white army stands a bit better than the black army. But instead of pinning the white knight here on f3, the black army could also play knight c6 before, defending their pawn on e5, also with the second chess piece. Now it's symmetric again. But here the white army could pin black's knight on c6, and again the white army will stand a bit better than the black army in this position now. But the classic decline of the king's gambit is bishop c5. And most of the times white will continue now with attacking your pawn on f5, with the knight with the move on f3. And now you just defend your pawn with pawn d6, how you have also done it before. Here, white now has to decide to either play pawn c3, with the idea to play pawn d4 and attacking the center of the chessboard after, and probably also play queen b3 later, attacking black's pawns on f7 and b7 both at the same time, or the option to play here not pawn c3, but rather knight c3. Let's first say pawn c3. Now the black army has many different continuation variations and many different options how to answer. For example, they could directly play now bishop b6, because they know that white will attack the bishop and the center of the chessboard with pawn d4 after. But they could also play knight f6, attacking your pawn on a4 now. But also a very interesting move how to continue and how to answer now is to play pawn f5. That's really pretty interesting, because black doesn't defend, but rather plays a counter attack now. Here, you, playing the white chess pieces, can either trade the pawns down here in the center of the chessboard, so you either take out black's pawn on e5 with your pawn on f4, or you take out black's pawn on f5 with your pawn on e4. Okay. But of course, you could also just continue with a general plan and attack the center of the chessboard also with your general plan, so pawn d4. White's second option here was to play knight c3 instead of pawn c3. So after knight c3, black again has many different options or many different continuation variations how to answer now. For example, knight c6 is very popular. Knight f6 again is of course also possible, or also bishop g4 again, pinning your knight on f3. But also very interesting would be pawn a6, trying to win a pawn now. That was it already with this video about the King's Gambit. I hope you liked it. If you liked it, feel free to leave a like there and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Bye!